Carla, I'm sharing with Deputy Mitchell 5 minutes each. The first thing I want to say is I'm always reluctant when we're discussing anything around homelessness, but particularly around child homelessness, in that it's nearly accepted. And the very first thing we have to say is it is totally unacceptable, disgraceful and completely unfair, and those words aren't even strong enough, for kids that are actually facing into growing up in B&Bs, hotels, these family hubs that we hear so much about. We don't have them in my constituency, but we do have emergency accommodation through hotels and B&Bs. And I'd also like to think of the kids that are living in very overcrowded and very difficult circumstances, where they're staying with families and staying with friends, and they're living in sitting rooms, and there's 5 of them in one bedroom. That is not a normal existence for children nowadays. Most of us in here are parents or have nieces, have nephews. That is not what we would accept or want for our children or for our family, and that's not what we should be accepting for other kids. Now, we can have this discussion every week, every month, every year. The figures keep increasing. That's what keeps happening time and time again. What we need to do is look at the solutions, and it sounds ridiculous because it's so sensible. The solution is to build houses. And whatever we have to do to ramp up that process, to speed that up, that's what we should be doing. This has gone beyond crisis. It's a total emergency situation, and it's really hard to believe that we're nearly facing into 2020 and we're still having this discussion. I also want to talk about the areas of domestic violence, because a number of children are also in refuges with mothers who have had to flee very difficult, very dangerous situations, and they're not counted. They're not even in these figures, nor are the children that are growing up in sitting rooms and 6 and 7 of them in one spare room. They're not counted either. So if you actually were to look at all of the figures, they're far worse than what we see. And it's just, I don't know how often we can say it in here, but it is completely unacceptable. We need to look at short-term measures to get people out of the emergency accommodation, and then we need to look at longer-term measures, such as building of houses. But we also need to look at people who fall into that middle category, where they don't qualify for social housing support, where they're paying very, very high rents, and they cannot even think about saving for a deposit for a mortgage because they're paying so much in rent every month. Now, years ago, the councils used to have a scheme that was changed in 2016, right when we were in the height of this whole housing emergency and child homeless crisis. We changed that, which is absolutely, it's unbelievable to think that actually even happened. The councils used to provide mortgages for people on a 3% deposit basis. That has now increased to 10%. So they're no different than a bank or a building society, and you're actually tying the hands of local authorities, particularly progressive local authorities, who are very active and who are doing their best to address the situation and who deal with very difficult individual cases every day, particularly now in the run-up to Christmas. And they're going home with that every day thinking, I want to try get X family or Y family sorted before Christmas. And we're tying their hands with schemes like changing the mortgage scheme. We need to see rent freezes, we need to see rent control. This happens in other countries. In New York City, one of the most capitalist cities in the world, you have rent control. Yet our government can't seem to accept that that's a viable solution. And the reality is there's too many people who sit in this chamber who are landlords. And we need to kind of get real about that. It's difficult really to know what else to say on the issue, because, as I've said in here before, it's like Groundhog Day sometimes coming in here when you're talking about homelessness. But when you're talking about kids now in the run-up to Christmas, writing their letters to Santa, getting excited about Christmas, wondering, are they still going to be in that hotel or sleeping on their granny's sitting room floor or couch? And that's just totally, totally unacceptable. And we need to decide, are we actually going to address it and change it? Or are we just going to keep coming in here having statements every month, every week, every year? It's always around this time of year as well, because it's an emotive time of year that we're talking about it. But we actually need to start addressing it. And the solutions are there. Not only that, in 2016 there was an all-party Oireachtas committee specifically around housing and homelessness, where all parties and none were represented on that committee and agreed a set of proposals. We're nearly 4 years later and they are not being carried out. So it's not like the solutions are not there. It's not like it's not an issue of funding, because we're told time and time again by the government that the funding is there. So then what is the actual problem here? It cannot be a situation where we're talking about statements on child homelessness as if that's a normal thing. And that's what's happening. And I also would like to know, because I often hear for kids, for example, if you're in a rural area, you might have access to one emergency accommodation, which is far away from your school and far away from any family support that you might have. What measures are actually taken? Because I hear a lot of the time that there's wraparound supports and there's additional supports, but I don't know any family that's ever actually received them, like extra money for childcare, extra money for trying to feed kids when you're confined to a hotel room. I don't know anyone that receives those supports, but I hear a lot about them. So what actually are those supports? Can we get 2 or 3 bullet points on exactly what those supports are, who gets them and how do you get them? Because I actually don't think that they exist in reality. I think they're like a lot of things, they're a plan on paper, but people aren't actually getting them. They're certainly not getting them in the rural constituencies. I'm going to finish up on that last King Carla because I want to